Johnny Depp, the name that echoes through Hollywood history. A man known for his mystery, his roles, and his rebellion against fame itself. But beneath the fame and flashing lights lived a secret no one ever truly uncovered. A love story hidden from the world. The tabloids tried to guess. The fans made theories. But only a handful of people ever knew the truth. This isn't a story about scandals or headlines. It's about a rare kind of love, the quiet kind that asks for nothing, not even recognition. The kind that existed long before the cameras started rolling and stayed long after the spotlight faded. Today, we dive into the one truth about Johnny Depp's heart that was never meant to be public. A secret love that shaped the man behind the legend. In the early days of Johnny Depp's fame, the world saw only the rising star, the rebellious young actor with eyes full of mystery and roles that made him a global icon. But behind the camera, behind the carefully constructed image, was a man who often felt utterly alone. Fame, for him, wasn't a blessing. It was a golden cage. The applause was loud, but the silence after it ended was louder. Everywhere he went, people looked at him, but few truly saw him. He was surrounded by crowds, but haunted by loneliness. The studios wanted perfection. The media wanted gossip. The world wanted pieces of him. But nobody asked what he needed. And somewhere between movie sets and hotel rooms, between red carpets and restless nights, Johnny learned a hard truth. Fame can give you everything, except peace. That's when he began to guard his heart like treasure, hiding his feelings behind humor, tattoos, and carefully chosen words. He loved deeply but quietly, because in Hollywood, love was a luxury too fragile to survive the spotlight. Then one ordinary evening, something unexpected happened. Not in a glittering party or a movie premiere, but in a simple cafe far from the chaos of Los Angeles. She wasn't famous. She wasn't chasing a dream. She didn't even recognize him at first. She looked at him not as a celebrity, but as a person. Tired eyes, quiet smile, and all. And for the first time in a long time, Johnny felt seen. Their first conversation was unplanned, unpolished, and real. No pretense. No agenda. Just two souls talking about books, music, and life. She didn't flatter him. She didn't ask for pictures. She asked how he was really doing, and that single question cracked the armor he'd built for years. That night, he realized that genuine connection doesn't care about status, cameras, or money. It just happens, quietly, powerfully, and without permission. Days turned into weeks, and their bond grew stronger. They met in quiet corners, exchanged letters, and shared long walks under streetlights where no one recognized him. For once, he didn't have to play a role. He could just be Johnny, the boy from Kentucky who loved poetry, guitars, and laughter. With her, there were no expectations, no scripts, and no pretending. She didn't want the Hollywood star. She wanted the man who was behind him. In her presence, the noise of fame faded. She gave him something the world had taken away, normalcy, and that was priceless. They could sit in silence, listen to old records, and talk about everything and nothing. It wasn't grand or dramatic. It was simple, and that's what made it beautiful. But Johnny knew this world wasn't kind to love stories that refused to perform. The cameras loved to twist tenderness into scandal. So he protected this relationship like a secret melody, beautiful, fragile, and known only to him and her. Few people in his circle even knew she existed. And maybe that was the only way it could survive, hidden from the noise, safe from the lies. In the years that followed, he would carry this memory like a secret fire, something that burned softly, warming his soul when fame turned cold. She wasn't part of his public story, but she became part of his heart's truth. Because sometimes, the greatest love stories aren't the ones that make headlines. They're the ones that live quietly in the spaces fame can't touch. It started like a whisper in a world full of noise. When Johnny Depp met her, he wasn't looking for love. He'd stopped believing in fairy tales a long time ago. Hollywood had taken those from him. Turned romance into rumors, intimacy into headlines, and truth into clickbait. But this was different. She wasn't dazzled by his fame. She didn't care about his fortune. She cared about him. The man beneath the eyeliner, the artist behind the chaos, the human who just wanted peace. Their connection wasn't explosive. It was quiet. The kind of love that didn't need an audience. They talked for hours, sometimes about deep things, sometimes about nothing at all. She'd ask him about his childhood, his favorite records, the kind of music he listened to when no one was around. He'd tell her stories from film sets, but not the glamorous ones, the lonely nights in hotel rooms, the exhaustion of pretending to be someone else for months at a time. When words weren't enough, they'd sit in silence, letting the music speak for them. Johnny would strum his guitar, eyes half closed, lost in a melody only she understood. And she'd listen, not as a fan, but as someone who heard the emotion behind every chord. Those moments became their secret world, a small space untouched by fame, where vulnerability wasn't weakness, and love didn't need to prove itself. Sometimes he'd write her letters, not long or fancy, just raw thoughts scribbled on paper between shoots. In one of them he wrote, "The truest love lives in silence. The louder the world gets, the softer the heart speaks." That single line became their unspoken promise. They didn't need to post pictures or walk red carpets together. Their connection existed in glances, in quiet phone calls, in the comfort of knowing that somewhere out there, one soul understood the other completely. She grounded him. When the world screamed his name, she reminded him to breathe. When the tabloids tore him apart, she told him that truth doesn't need a shout, it only needs to stay. And that's what they did. They stayed. For months, maybe years, depending on whose memory you ask. Their love was not dramatic. It was not cinematic. It was real, which made it sacred. But they both knew the cost of exposure. One leaked photo, one careless whisper, and their sanctuary would vanish. Hollywood doesn't allow privacy. It devours it. So they made a pact to love quietly, away from the cameras, away from the noise. Not out of fear, but protection. Protection of something fragile and irreplaceable. There were nights when he'd call her from faraway hotel balconies, the city lights reflecting off the glass like stars. He'd say, "I just wanted to hear your voice." She'd laugh softly and say, "You sound tired." And he'd reply, "Only until you answer." Those conversations were short, simple, and everything he needed. Their relationship was like an unrecorded song, existing only in memory, not in the public eye. It healed him in ways fame never could. She reminded him what sincerity felt like, what peace sounded like, and what love could be when stripped of attention. For a man who had spent years performing for the world, she gave him the rare gift of being seen, without being watched. And maybe that's why it meant so much. It wasn't a Hollywood romance. It was two people choosing silence over spectacle, truth over headlines, heart over hype. They didn't need the world to understand their story, because it wasn't written for the world. It was written for them, in quiet rooms, late at night, to the sound of music only they could hear. It was bound to happen eventually. No secret in Hollywood stays buried forever. Not when cameras lurk behind every corner and whisper sell faster than truth. Johnny knew it too. But when one journalist stumbled upon a clue to his hidden love, it felt like the walls around his private world began to crack. It started with something small, a photograph, not the kind splashed across tabloids, but one taken quietly, by chance. Johnny had been seen in a quiet corner cafe, far from Los Angeles, far from fame. Sitting across from him was her, the woman no one in the public had ever seen before. She wasn't dressed like a star. No makeup, no designer labels, just a simple warmth that stood out more than any red carpet sparkle. To the journalists who spotted them, it was gold, a secret headline waiting to explode. Within days, the rumors began. Johnny Depp's new mystery woman. The gossip site screamed. Every outlet wanted the exclusive. Reporters started digging, following flight records, watching his bodyguards, questioning his assistants. The machine of speculation roared to life. But Johnny, he didn't panic. He didn't lash out or issue statements. Instead, he did what few expected. He stayed silent. His silence wasn't fear. It was protection. Because the truth wasn't scandalous. It was sacred. Those close to him said they saw a change in his demeanor during that time. He was calm, almost poetic, as if he'd made peace with the idea that real love doesn't need defending. When his publicist urged him to make an official statement, he simply said, "If I have to explain it, it stops being ours." Those words became legendary among his team, the perfect example of how deeply he valued loyalty over fame. For Johnny, love had never been about possession or publicity. It was about respect. And respecting her meant keeping her safe, not just from the media, but from the circus that followed him everywhere. She wasn't built for that world, and he refused to let it consume her. So, instead of denying the story or admitting it, he did something far braver. He let it exist in mystery. When the article finally came out, it was full of speculation, but short on facts. The journalist wrote about the woman's gentle presence and unfamiliar face, but couldn't name her or find proof of who she really was. Fans debated endlessly. Some believed it was a made-up story. Others swore the look in Johnny's eyes in recent interviews, softer, more distant, was proof that something real had happened. But behind closed doors, Johnny was writing again. Not scripts or statements, letters, notes, fragments of thoughts that only one person would ever read. He once wrote, "The moment they try to define what we were, it stopped being real. So I'll stay quiet and let silence tell our story." And that's what he did. Every now and then, he'd appear at public events, smiling politely, charming as ever. But if you looked closely, you'd notice small things. The ring he wore that wasn't from any brand, the bracelet on his wrist made from simple leather, or the way he'd touch it absent-mindedly during interviews. Little reminders of something, or someone the public couldn't name. When asked about love in one interview, he smiled faintly and said, "Love doesn't always need an audience. Sometimes the purest kind hides from the noise." It was one of those lines that slipped under the radar, but for those who knew his story, it said everything. That was Johnny's quiet rebellion. In a world obsessed with exposure, he chose secrecy. In a business that profits from heartbreak, he chose honor. His silence wasn't a shield. It was an act of devotion. Because sometimes the loudest way to love someone is to never let the world touch their name. Every love story has its season. And for Johnny Depp, that season, the one that kept his heart alive in silence, began to fade without warning. At first, it wasn't heartbreak. It was timing. Fame is a jealous lover. It wants all of you all the time. The late-night flights, the endless film sets, the interviews that ran long. They left little room for quiet coffee mornings and shared sunsets. What began as a promise to stay connected slowly became a series of missed calls and postponed plans. Love, no matter how pure, can't always survive distance. And for them, distance became the unspoken third person in their relationship. He'd send messages between shoots. "Miss your voice." Sometimes she'd reply instantly. Sometimes hours later. The warmth remained, but the rhythm faltered. Both knew it, yet neither wanted to admit it. Because how you let go of something that still feels right, even when it's slipping away? Their last real moment together wasn't dramatic. No shouting, no slammed doors, no tears on a movie set. It was a quiet evening, a soft rain outside, and two people holding hands, knowing that love wasn't enough to bridge the miles anymore. She told him she'd always be proud of him. He told her she'd always be a part of him. And when she walked away, it wasn't out of anger, it was out of love. After she left, he buried himself in work. That's what artists do. They turn their pain into poetry, their heartbreak into melody. His music grew deeper, his art darker, his words heavier. There was a melancholy beauty in everything he created, as if every chord, every brushstroke carried a whisper of her name. Fans noticed the change. The man who once smiled with mischief now smiled with memory. In interviews, when asked about love, he'd pause longer than usual. He never mentioned her name, but his answers carried her ghost. "There was someone once," he'd say softly, "someone who taught me that love isn't about holding on. It's about understanding when to let go." She became the invisible muse behind his work, the heartbeat behind the silence. Some say she was the reason he began writing more music again, pouring out emotions too personal for interviews. A few close friends claimed he kept her letters in a wooden box, tied with an old string. He never confirmed it, but when asked about it once, he smiled that small, knowing smile that said everything without words. Years passed, and the world moved on, as it always does. But for Johnny, There were traces of her everywhere. A familiar perfume in a crowd. A song they once shared playing unexpectedly on the radio. Sometimes he'd stop, listen, and for a fleeting moment, it all came rushing back. The laughter, the quiet nights, the peace she gave him. He never spoke bitterly of her. In fact, he never spoke badly of love at all. When fans asked how he survived heartbreak, he once replied, "You don't survive it. You learn to live with it. You carry it like a melody only you can hear." And perhaps that's the truth of it. She didn't leave his story. She simply changed chapters. Their love didn't end in flames. It faded like a candle, slowly, softly, beautifully, leaving behind warmth that never really died. In the end, she remained a part of his soul, immortalized not through photographs or interviews, but through art, hidden in the brushstrokes of his paintings, the pauses in his sentences, the emotion in his performances. He once said, "Some people leave, but their echo stays forever." And she, the woman the world never knew, became that echo in his heart. They say Johnny Depp wears his stories on his skin. Every tattoo, every bracelet, every scar tells a tale. But what if one of those stories wasn't for the world? What if it was for her? Over the years, eagle-eyed fans began to notice subtle details. Tiny things, almost invisible unless you were looking closely. A thin, handmade bracelet he wore during interviews. It wasn't designer, it didn't shine, but he never took it off. Not on red carpets, not during tours, not even in films where he could ever place it with something flashier. It looked like something made by hand, a small thread of memory tied around his wrist. Then came the tattoo. Johnny's tattoos have always carried personal meaning, every one of them tied to a chapter of his life. But there was one, inked quietly, without the media frenzy that usually surrounded his art. A small symbol, unfamiliar to most. Some fans said it resembled an infinity sign. Others thought it looked like a musical note twisted into a heart. But those who knew his story whispered something else. That was a mark of a promise, a quiet forever share between two people who loved in silence. In one of his lesser-known songs, written during a break between films, there's a haunting line. "You taught me how to stay quiet in a world that only shouts." At first, listeners thought it was just poetic. But when paired with the timing of his rumored relationship, the words hit differently. It wasn't just poetry. It was confession disguised as art. During interviews, he'd sometimes drift when asked about inspiration. Once, a journalist pressed him, "Who do you write for?" Johnny smiled faintly and said, "For the ones who never asked to be written about." That line sent the internet into overdrive. Who was the one? Who didn't want to be written about? The mystery grew, and with it, the legend of his secret muse. Even his fashion choices hinted at hidden meaning. The rings he wore, usually bold, silver, and rebellious, had one newcomer, a small, delicate band that didn't match his usual style. When asked about it, he simply said, "It's not jewelry. It's a reminder." A reminder of what? He didn't say. But the tone in his voice told the world it wasn't about aesthetics. It was about emotion. Fans began piecing it all together like detectives of the heart. The quiet tattoo, the bracelet, the recurring lyrics about silence, memory, and goodbye. Together, they painted a picture. Not a Hollywood romance, but a private love that left fingerprints all over his art. It wasn't a scandal. It was a symphony of subtle goodbyes. And maybe that's how he wanted it. Not erased, not exposed, but hidden in plain sight. Because for Johnny, love was never meant for the tabloids. It was meant for the canvas, the notebook, the melody. It was the kind of love you don't post, the kind you protect even after it's gone. In one rare interview years later, when asked about pain and memory, Johnny replied softly, "Some people leave, but they never really go. You just learn to find them in the things they left behind." That statement, simple, almost offhand, became one of the most quoted lines of his career. But few knew he wasn't talking about fame or loss in general. He was talking about her, the woman who never sought attention, the love story no camera ever captured, the muse whose presence could still be found, not in pictures or headlines, but in the smallest details that only a true fan would notice. Because in the end, that's how artists say goodbye, not with words, not with tears, but but with symbols, sounds, and ink. Quiet reminders that love, once real, never truly disappears. It just changes form. It becomes art. Years passed, but some memories never fade. They simply soften, like an old photograph kept in the corner of a wallet. For Johnny Depp, that secret love didn't end when the story did. It lived quietly inside him, shaping how he saw the world, how he loved, and how he created. Every character he played, every lyric he wrote, carried a trace of that invisible tenderness, a reminder that not all love is meant to be loud. Hollywood is a place that worships noise. Flashbulbs, interviews, the endless cycle of questions about who's dating who. But Johnny learned something most people never do. That real love doesn't need an audience. It doesn't need to be posted, paraded, or proven. The truest kind of love simply is. It doesn't scream for attention. It stays still, steady, and pure, like a heartbeat beneath the chaos. In one of his later interviews, he was asked what love meant to him. He paused for a long time, as if searching for the right words among years of emotion. Finally, he smiled faintly and said, "Love isn't about possession. It's about presence. When you really love someone, they never leave you, even when they're gone." The interviewer thought it was just poetic wisdom, but those who knew his past heard something deeper. That was the voice of a man speaking from experience, not imagination. Those who spent time around him noticed subtle changes. He became calmer, more introspective. The wild rebellion of his youth softened into a quiet kind of confidence, the kind that comes from having known something real. He still loved music, laughter, and mischief, but there was a gentleness now, a gravity in his silence. That secret relationship had taught him that love doesn't always need to be eternal to be true. Sometimes it comes into your life for a reason, to show you a part of yourself you couldn't see before. She had shown him vulnerability wasn't weakness, that softness could be strength, and that loyalty meant protecting something even when the world demanded to see it. When he spoke at charity events or film festivals, his words carried a different kind of warmth. He talked about kindness, empathy, and authenticity, values rarely celebrated in the world he lived in, and people felt it. It wasn't an act. It was real. Behind the smoky voice and mysterious aura was a man who had loved deeply and learned even deeper truths. Sometimes, when fans handed him letters, he'd take his time reading them, often thanking them with surprising sincerity. "You never know what someone's going through," he'd say. It was as if he understood love and pain not as opposites, but as two sides of the same coin. In his art, too, the echoes of that relationship lingered. The songs became slower, the lyrics more personal. His paintings, once chaotic and wild, began to show warmth, intimacy, and reflection. Each stroke seemed to whisper, "I remember." He often said, "I don't believe love ever dies. It just changes shape." And maybe that was his truth. Their story might have ended, but its energy transformed into something timeless, into music, movies, and moments that would outlive them both. Johnny never revealed her name. He never wrote a tell-all, never cashed in on his own heartbreak. And that, perhaps, is what made the story even more powerful. In a world that sells secrets, he chose silence. In a culture obsessed with proving love, he chose to feel it. Privately, quietly, forever. Because in the end, what that secret love taught him wasn't how to hold tighter, but how to let go with grace. It taught him that love doesn't need witnesses. It just needs truth. And that truth, whispered between two souls, can echo louder than any headline ever could. Some love stories don't need cameras or applause. They live quietly in memory. Johnny Depp's secret love wasn't about fame, fortune, or attention. It was about two souls who found each other in a world built on noise and chose silence instead. Behind the mystery, the tattoos, and the headlines was a man who once loved deeply and lost beautifully. That hidden love didn't break him. It shaped him. It reminded the world that even legends carry soft hearts, and sometimes the greatest romance is the one no one ever knew existed.